This week we welcome our next instalment of our special guests, High Performance Sport NZ sports psychologist Dom Vettise. For the past 8 years, Dom has worked with some of New Zealand's best athletes and teams on the world stage, such as New Zealand Rugby Black Ferns, the New Zealand All Whites and the New Zealand canoe team at the Paris Olympics. With a background in clinical psychology, Dom has taken his passion for sports and turned his attention to both pre-performance athletes as well as the seasoned pros to help develop individual coping strategies, mental skills and performance behaviours that are essential in the quest for achieving success. In this episode we explore the world of sports psychology and leave listeners with some tools to implement and information to explore further, which will help you on your journey towards mastery. Okay, let's go! Dom Vettise, welcome along to Strive 365. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you.
Mate, we're just talking off camera. It's been a number of years since we first connected back in my New Zealand football days when I was the HPAD manager for New Zealand football, and part of my role was to support the education and growth of young athletes. And one of the areas we wanted to add more support and education was around the sports psych space. And you were sort of just venturing out on your sport journey, part of this through High Performance Sport, and we connected there. So but since New Zealand football, I spoke in your bio around some of the fantastic events and teams and athletes within New Zealand sport that you've been really fortunate enough to work with and help on their journey. But have you got any favourite memories that stand out?
Yeah, definitely going to the Paris Olympics was a real bonus, real pleasure. And just some of the events that I went to, I won't name names, but just some of the teams and an individual that I've worked with for, 7 to 8 years, seeing them reach their dreams, whether that was just competing at the games or winning a medal. That was very special to be a part of, like those journeys. So yeah, that would have to be an absolute highlight. Was watching them and being allowed to be there live. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, and I think one of the real desires to have people like yourself on the show who aren't necessarily the athlete or the coach. You are part of the support network, right? You are part of the team behind the athlete or behind the team. So very much part of the furniture, so to speak. And I can see on your face there that the highs and the reward of that medal or that performance is very much, you feel that you've contributed a big part of that, right? So will I be correct in thinking that that's how you feel and that's how things have resonated with you as part of the support stuff?
Yeah, a little bit to a certain extent. It's quite interesting because I think after success in Tokyo with Black Ferns Sevens, a lot of people kind of asking me a lot of questions around it, but I was thinking about them and my contribution there. And it wasn't too different to another team that I was working with that wasn't doing so well. So I was just generally questioning what is the actual impact that I have. No doubt there is some impact there, but it's not to probably get too far ahead of yourself, because I guess one part is a lot of those athletes at the HP area, they've gotten there themselves with not much support. So it's trying to be humble in that approach as much as you possibly can. But yeah, I love spending the time sitting down and talking and helping people out where I can, for sure.
Now, before we get into the sport realm, you spent a fair chunk of your more formative years developing in the registered clinical and performance psychologist is the title. So you got the clinical piece and then you got the sports and the performance piece. Maybe just for my benefit and maybe the audience listening, what is the difference? What do we mean by clinical? We can kind of get an association of understanding around what the performance and sporting piece would be. But what is the clinical? What are the main differences, I guess, between that space and the sporting world?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to the training and the depth of training that you kind of get. So you spend a lot more time in a 3-year applicable context where you're practicing, you're interning, you're watching videos back and forth as much as possibly can, rather just being in sport. You'll spend a lot more time working and having internships in corrections, forensics, adults, child mental health, older adult. So you're working a lot more in the mental health primarily area and getting a lot more training around your ability to assess, diagnose a mental illness and then build treatment plans and things from there. Whereas sports just slightly a little bit different. They're still included, but it's just it's a little bit different when you start trying to help people find their edge, essentially.
You mentioned mental health. It's been a relatively big buzzword and topic, and it's been brought more into the forefront of people's vocabulary, and also the support that goes into that, and in athletes and education and schooling. It's a big issue, right? It can be a big issue, certainly in New Zealand and young males for the most part. But what is, in your definition or the way you look at mental health versus mental well-being, how important is it for us as coaches, in my situation, parents listening, and young athletes, to make sure that they're looking after their mental health?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think what we're trying to do is at least trying to reduce the stigma around mental ill health and mental illness within sport, because historically, not many athletes will come forward and say that they're struggling with something, because it is an area of vulnerability, and there's the scaredness of them not being selected as a result of having to deal with some of the stuff. Now, undoubtedly, your mental health is going to be linked to your performance. So making sure you've got a good foundation around looking after your mental health, your mood, your sleep, anxiety, things like that, will eventually help performance, but not getting muddled up with, if you have a mental illness or diagnosis, doesn't mean that you can't perform, which is probably the thing that some coaches and parents and athletes get themselves tripped up in. Said, if I'm seeking this help and I get a diagnosis, then I won't be able to do what I need to do. They absolutely can. We've seen heaps of examples of athletes who have had a mental health diagnosis and still been able to perform. But really in sport, the best thing that we can be doing is trying to raise awareness, trying to reduce stigma, and also making sure we've got the right resources in place for people in case they are struggling with their mental health, for sure.
What would some red flags be? Is it a behavioural thing? If someone's behaving in an unnormal way for that particular person, would mum or dad be the best people to be able to spot this? Because certainly for youth athletes to live in at home for the most part, is it maybe an external person like the coach who might see them less regularly but reasonably regularly that has built that relationship? What is your experience around that? And in terms of athletes that might be struggling, do they tend to reach out to the external person, i.e. the coach, more so than mum or dad, or was it more through the parents? How do you see?
So I think parents pick up on it more. Research would tell us that not too many athletes will go to their coaches, but the coaches will pick up on it, and then there's probably a bit of scaredness around, will I say the right or wrong thing? Will I make them worse if I say a particular thing to them in training when I'm trying to help them find their edge? It's hard because there are obviously symptoms of certain diagnoses that make a big difference, but really we're trying to see, I try and ask what is actually normal, because I'm not even sure what normal is anymore. But is there a difference or a change in their behaviour from their normal, is when we start to notice some things, and then it's starting to open up and have that conversation with them around what you're noticing in terms of the behaviour first, before actually making some assumptions either around performance and things. Yeah. So you might notice, for example, a player turning up that normally would turn up to training on time or early might be starting to turn up a little bit later. You might be seeing them trying to get away from training a little bit more. You might be seeing that they're talking about their motivation isn't quite there as such. They might spend, as for parents, they might be spending more time in their bedroom than what they normally would, or they won't be going out and seeing their friends. Or they might be becoming more fixated on having to win and putting pressure on those areas. So there's a lot of differences that we notice. I just kind of say to people, is it really changing from what you normally see in that person? And then has that been going on for a matter of 2 or 3 weeks? And then that's probably time to step in and start to try and talk about it.
So for the coaches listening, if they feel that they can maybe identify or see this behavioural change, and it may not be a mental health related thing, right? But it's a change. What's your advice to them? Would it be to encourage them to go and have a conversation with mum or dad or whoever the caregiver is, or speak to the athlete first? How do you see that kind of best practice looking?
Yeah, I definitely would go and speak to the athlete first. I think it's how you start to approach that conversation. So you might be starting to talk or just say, hey, look, I'm noticing X, Y, and Z about your behaviour. I just want to check to make sure you're okay. That's probably how I just start the conversation. If, for example, that there's multiple coaches in the team, or if they've got someone that is in a welfare position in the club, you might go and talk to them within the club to get advice on how to approach this, or could they perhaps approach it. That's probably the first steps, and I would talk to the behaviour as much as you can. This is what I've noticed has changed a little bit. I just want to check and see how you're doing. If they're kind of saying, yeah, I'm all good, I'm fine, which can be a natural and normal response because they're often scared, to have that conversation and go, cool, Les, I'll have a check-in with you in a couple of days' time or something like that if you're right with it, and then approach it again. Yeah, so that's how I'd initiate the starting conversation.
Cool. Don't want to speak or spend too long around mental health space because it could be a minefield, and I'm certainly not trained in it, and it's not why you're on here to talk about it, but it's something that is a part of. You spoke about a few times the edge, right? Finding the athlete's edge in order to perform. So an unhappy athlete is likely to be an underperforming athlete. That would be my summation of that. So a big part of this conversation is, as coaches, we don't get a lot, if any, education, support, resources around the athlete mental skills, the psychological performance sort of realm. And unless you're fortunate, you're working in a high performance level or stage where maybe there's a sports psych associated to your national program or your club or whatever, then very unlikely that we're going to be able to find some of these suggestions and tips and tools. So I do want to try and tease out as much as the learning from you as we can, and maybe point us in different directions to go and do some own research. But just before we move into the sports space, so going off your website, Dom, you've got around the clinical psychology part, there was sort of three things that caught my eye: cognitive behavioral theory, mindfulness-based therapies, and acceptance and commitment therapies. So therapies, in my layman's understanding, would be things to help improve or go away and bring into my world, which will ultimately improve or move me forward in certain areas. But some of those things I've come across before: cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness, amongst other things. How or what are some of these ideas, concepts, and then maybe try and draw some parallels with how maybe coaches or parents and athletes listening might be able to either implement them in their own life or go away and think, oh, that sounds really interesting. Where might I go and find out more on this?
Yeah, really good question. And there's some good practical congruence between the type of therapy and what coaches and parents can do as well. So those three particular type of therapies are what I'm primarily trained in. I've gone and sought out extra training, and there's a whole bunch of other ones. And probably if you looked at them critically, there's a significant amount of crossover. So I don't like people to get too tied up in the actual therapy itself. But if we look at just cognitive behavior therapy, that's around the concept of the fact that everyone's faced with a situation or an event. The brain then thinks about it. The way you think about it influences the way that you feel, and the way that you feel influences your behavior or your performance. So a lot of the work that I would do in there is, if I want to improve someone's performance, I need to impact the way that they feel, and the way that I impact the way they feel is by looking at their thinking. And so what we typically have is we have a lot of cognitive distortions and a lot of thoughts that cause us to become unfocused, or we typically focus on the negative stuff first. So my job to help the player or the athlete improve their performance in that regard is to go, well, what were you thinking in that moment when you saw a change in emotion, when you experienced more stress or more pressure? What were the thoughts that were driving that? And how do I help challenge some of those thoughts in order to change the level of pressure in order to change performance? So that's kind of like CBT or cognitive behavior therapy, a little bit in a nutshell. It's challenging and changing thoughts to influence behavior. And there's some other stuff that we can set up with that as well. I can talk about that maybe later. But the mindfulness approaches kind of feed into the acceptance and commitment therapy stuff. So acceptance and commitment therapy is kind of like strategies and ways to be able to accept the current situation for what it is and commit to a valued action. So I love working with athletes around what are your values? What's really important to you? You might be in a particular situation in your game, and there's stuff that you cannot control, that you cannot change about. You can't think your way out of this, like what we do in CBT. So actually, how do you accept that, and how do you commit to a particular value? Say, for example, courage. So what does courage look like in this moment? And not just in their game, but also in their life as well. And then I like the mindfulness component to ACT and kind of mindfulness-based therapies, which is the ability to notice, grow awareness, build relaxation, get into the present moment as much as you possibly can. So I'm big on formal meditation and mindfulness practice, but I also know with athletes, you don't have 15 minutes in a game to be able to try and get yourself present. So I'm really interested in, well, how can we bring that in the short term into a game? So for example, a goalkeeper, how can you become present using like the 5 senses in the space of a couple of seconds? But it also needs to be practiced off the field as well. So that's kind of where the mindfulness, the therapies sit.
So in terms of those three, are they like your base programs that you include into team and individual sports now? Like from a clinical background into the sport, to speak through that transition, like I don't know, right? I'm assuming that a lot of them are transferable because you're working with people, whether they're an athlete or not, right? So everyone has thoughts, positive and negative. Everybody can be mindful or not, and everybody can have their own values and put things into action. So maybe just now bring that into the sporting landscape and go, how are these now transferable with your work to the Rugby Black Ferns Sevens, for example?
Yeah, so would be an easy way to describe it. So let's talk about, again, it depends what resonates with the person, and what the problem is that we're facing will depend on what I choose, and it might be a mixture of all three of them and some others as well. But for example, like I love the concept of ACT the most in sport, as much as I possibly can. So what we might do is we might set up a bit of a mental blueprint around what they look like when they're not focused and they're distracted, and we know what behaviours they're starting to do. Typically, they'll do 3 behaviours. They'll succumb in those moments, they'll overcompensate, they'll do more than what they need to do, or they'll shift responsibility and blame other people or the pitch conditions or something like that. The most common one in a lot of athletes is overcompensate. So you might see, for example, your centre midfielder going out onto the left wing, right wing, back, and that they're doing more than what their role is because of the anxiety that's driving that. So when we notice them shift into a place of overcompensation, what some of the things that they can do to bring themselves back into the present moment. So I'd use something like that ACT, where they've got to accept and acknowledge the emotions or the thoughts that are going on for them. C would be like to calm their system through like breath work or anything like that, and T is towards. So how do we move toward with courage? So I'd link all of that into their particular values as much as I possibly can. So their value might not be courage, it might be respect. It's like, well, how do you show respect in that particular moment for yourself, and attaching that to a particular action. So it might be get on the ball as much as I can, because at the moment I'm anxious because I'm not getting on the ball and I'm going and hiding and I'm losing focus. So we'll just use some of those strategies, especially with like the ability to bounce back into the present moment. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Is it very much like on the individual basis, or are you able to go into a team environment and provide, here's some tools and some ideas that will cover the variety within that group? Like, yeah, do you start at team level and then work into individual, or is it only ever individual?
And I work a lot with the team. That would be my preference where I can. And so you might give a basic blueprint of how the brain operates, how it operates under pressure, the language that we use. And so that everybody has a shared mental model of understanding what pressure looks like and how to find your edge and how to create focus. And then we might drill down into the units, whether it's like midfield unit, forwards, back, so they all understand how they're operating together. But then some of those individual strategies as well, they'll resonate differently with different people. So I would tailor all of those differently to each individual in that team. Yeah, so it's got to make sense. It's got to make sense for them. I try and make them come up with their own kind of story and narrative as much as they possibly can, and then I will adapt. So while I have evidence-based frameworks of what I know works for performance, I want the athlete, I want the unit, I want the team to use their own language, and my job is to be a bit more creative and bringing that to life with that particular team. Because what works for one team might not necessarily work for another team. So you've got to be quite specific around the language.
How important is the leader of that team? So there's probably a few leaders, right? The head coach is probably a leader, maybe a technical director or sporting director or the CEO. How critical is it having the leaders buy-in or acceptance of these sort of practices and time spent on things outside of the tic-tac physical space? How critical is it for this to land and stick with athletes?
It's absolutely critical. If, say, for example, the psychologist doesn't have a good relationship with the coach, good luck getting these messages across in that team. It's probably not going to work. You're probably not going to get the time that you need to be able to deliver it. And again, they're not relaying a lot of those messages to the players. And like, as a coach, like you see things subtly that I would never be able to pick up. And like I know football reasonably well, but again, I'm not going to pick up what a professional coach is going to pick up. But then when I go into kayak, I certainly don't know kayak very well. So you rely a lot on the coaches to like be open-minded enough to essentially share some of those messages, to use similar language, to reflect back on something that they may have heard in a presentation or that you may have had on a one-on-one with the coaches. I'd probably say most psychologists working in sport would just say it's absolutely critical. If you don't have coach buy-in, it's a pretty hard push.
And in the top end, right, the Olympic level, senior professional, international stage, sports psychology is, it's a big part of the team. So for athletes listening now who are working their way or striving their way to become one of these people in the hopefully not too distant future, the mental space, the psychology space, the working on all those things you've drip fed in the last 10 minutes of conversation, how much as a percentage roughly, how much percentage of time or energy or effort or importance would this space be given in the performance, high performance, professional level space compared to maybe at youth level where these athletes are now kind of maybe, working their way through?
I would say a pretty high level of importance with the highest performing athletes, a lot more than what we're seeing in the development at the moment. And I'd even say that's the differences in conversation are significantly different as well. I can talk to that if you want at some stage, but at the highest level, most of them, I mean, I'm biased, but most of them, like physical attributes, training very much, the same, like there's only a small amount, but the gap between the very best and the great, the work that they're doing around their mental performance is huge. The commitment to it, the obsession with improvement, the ability, believe it or not, to be self-compassionate in a moment of high intense pressure, opposed to being self-critical. Like you can see it quite clearly, but their obsession and the openness of improvement, even in the smallest things, is so much greater. And their openness to learn more about their identity and themselves is the biggest shift compared to probably in the development stages. Whereas I'd much prefer to be working as much as I can in the development stages around like the identity, but it seems at the higher end they're trying to get that more, whereas we kind of want the cool, sexy stuff at the development level. Yeah.
So if I'm a young athlete listening, and I probably would have thought that maybe there's a high level of importance on this at those next stages. I'm now thinking, how can I get an edge on my people that I'm competing with to find that contract or to gain that selection? And if I'm not fortunate enough that I'm in a stream where there's this sort of support provided to me, or I'm a parent of one of these athletes, what are some of the practical things that the athlete can now start to try and develop, become more accustomed to close that learning gap for when hopefully they do make that transition, or that might be the one thing that tips them over the edge into making that transition that they can do without the big level of support that maybe New Zealand Olympic Committee can provide?
Yeah, I think there's 2 to 3 things. Is probably getting really clear on what success means to you outside of winning. I'm really interested. So for example, in your week prep before you race, before you play, what are 2 or 3 things that you can do that are going to make it more likely that you're going to perform, and writing those things down. So getting really clear in terms of your intent and purpose as you're going through your week, because often what I'll see is a lot of players, athletes will go into their training session and do exactly what their coach says, which is great. But in terms of then their reflective practice, which will be the second piece, it's not as great because they don't know what they're going in intending to do at that point in time. So I think if they're going into a training session through their week with intent and purpose, and they know exactly what that is that they're trying to do to get better, that's probably the first point, aside from just winning a game or winning a race. The second part would be around starting to build and learn on a process of how you bounce back from a mistake, from non-selection, from missing a shot, whatever those triggers might be. Starting to go, what could a process be that I could do? So that could be something as simple as what I said before around the act. So I just need to acknowledge it. I need to find a way to calm myself through, like, breath work might be a real simple way, and I need to know what my next move is. Or they might go win-win, which is a concept of what's important now, what's important next. And so starting to build that into their training as much as they possibly can, and then obviously in a game. So that'd be the second part. And then the third and final, most important part, especially in the development area, is like their ability to reflect on their game, and beyond just what did I do well, what did I not do so well. I could be asking questions around, where did you notice your most improvement? How well out of 5 did you bounce back from a mistake or when you lost focus? How well did you train your intent? What would you be doing better next time in the next week? How could you think differently in this particular situation that you didn't perform at your best? What was your best memory, for example, from your training session or from your week, so that you're still staying reasonably positive and optimistic about it? So the mental prep, the ability to bounce back, and then I'd say your ability to reflect deeply on yourself and your game from a psychological perspective, opposed just from a behavioural, tactical perspective.
I came across a guy called Dan Abrams, which I know you would have also come across, English sports psych guy, did a lot in football, is now doing some work in golf, and he's got some really clear and easy books that I'll put in the links in the show notes too, or the titles at least, where some of these things that you're speaking about are going off in my mind around really easy tools that I could think back. So talk about the mental prep. So he speaks about a script, same as the script that an author would have, or an actor, would have about the film. Here's the words that you need to go and put into action on stage. So it's writing down, being really clear on what is it I want or need to do now, i.e. in the performance, and maybe it's a piece of paper or it's written on my arm, and you start to see more and more kind of athletes these days, with some sort of, it could be a symbol, it could be a buzzword, it could be something like family. It kind of helps, I'm assuming it helps the athlete become motivated, but also clear with their task at hand when things get crazy. So is there any other, practical examples you can maybe share around that match preparation piece before we move on to the other two?
Yeah, again, it's trying to bring some of those processes and integrating them into some of the things that you might be doing. So even just in your stretching and your warm-ups, are you being fully present and training your brain to do those things there? Where you're really noticing the stretching in your muscles, there can be some basic mental skills around goal setting, which I still think links to intent. Your visualization is probably another really simple one that you can bring into your preparation. So visualizing yourself playing either the perfect game, about visualizing yourself bouncing back from a mistake, and visualizing that process that we talked about before, which is another one of, I think, Dan Abraham's stuff around spot, stop, shift. And you could be practicing breathing techniques. So there's so many on YouTube. There's multiple apps that you could say, actually 5 minutes a day, I'm going to do some breathing techniques. Get yourself in a cold shower and practice the breathing techniques in there. Set yourself some clear goals for the week's or some challenges. There's some real simple things there that I think people can start to jump on. And I do think reflection is one that should still stay throughout the week as well.
So you spoke about visualization, dream game, again, going back to Dan's sort of work, or he might have coined a different term, but he's talking about building racetracks in your brain, right? So that's just habits over and over and over that become ingrained, which is just a good way of thinking about it. But, he would say that, well, sports psych people, I assume, would say, so please tell me if this is complete BS, visualizing the game or your best performance or the performance that's coming up in real deep clarity, hear the crowd, smell the grass, feel the contact, etc. Science would say that it has the ability to improve performance by playing it through your brain, through clarity, through seeing what best performance is going to look like, is actually shown to actually show improvements in performance. It's not just the physical training. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely true. Yeah, 100%. But again, I like variety in the visualization as well. So yes, you can imagine the perfect game, but if you keep on doing that, what are you going to do when a mistake hits? So again, visualizing what would you do in that moment when a mistake hits, but setting the scene beforehand, I think, is really important. So you talked about the 5 senses. So if I'm working with the player and I'm doing a visualization script with them, I'm making sure that I'm including, like the sounds that they would hear around them, what they see, what they would notice, what they would smell. And as we're going through that script, I'd often pause it and get them to like breathe and relax themselves. Then I'd continue on and breathe and relax themselves as we're going through the script. One thing that they can do as well is, rather than just trying to make it up in their head, write themselves down a script, type it out, and then voice record it for themselves. So that then when they listen back to it in their headphones, they're getting the same messages over and over and over and over again. And you can do that from different perspectives, from the perspective of what you would see, from the perspective of what you would see from a drone view. It just depends on the player and what works well and what resonates with them as much as possible. Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned, when things don't go well. So, you need to have some sort of mechanism for that. I was just thinking of a story I was telling somebody the other day. Like, I was fortunate enough that actually when you were with us, Michaela Foster, daughter of Ian Foster, was with one of our groups. And not only did Ian come in and speak around like blue head, red head, he spoke around the All Blacks had, some techniques around like grounding and resetting, like almost like hitting Control-Alt-Delete on a computer to reboot the system. And Mickey had a good one, growing up around All Blacks and all this sort of high performance things. She has some great things, but she was like, I make a mistake, and I literally just put my finger, create the finger like I'm flushing the toilet, and just kind of press it into my leg. So I'm like flushing the toilet and flushing away all the waste and flushing away the mistake. And then, new clean water comes up in the toilet bowl and we're good to go again, right? So that was a really cool one that stuck with me that I share a little bit around kind of resetting and reframing. And the All Blacks talk about not doubling up on a mistake. So I give away a bad pass. The worst thing you can do is overcompensate, as you said, and go in too hard and give away a free kick now, where before it was just a bad pass. Is there anything you can share with us from your teams or athletes that you've worked with that maybe people can maybe test out for themselves?
Yeah, so there's two parts. That make sure you remind me to come back to the test out bit. But yeah, that stuff is good, but you've also got to learn from that, right? So while you may flush it in a game, to use Michaela's example, I also think the reflection at the end of the game around like, how did I manage that in that particular time? Some people will make the mistake of going, don't think of the mistake, don't think of the mistake. But the fact of the matter is, if you say that multiple times, it's like if I said to you, think whatever you want, but don't think of a pink elephant, then all that's going to start coming to you is the pink elephant. So that's the importance of ACT, is being able to acknowledge that particular piece or that emotion, and then having some of those strategies. The other one, which I really like, is around Kristen Neff's work, and she talks about self-compassion. So most of the time when people make a mistake, they'll beat themselves up about it, because we know that if we're more critical on ourselves, we get better. And that's worked for us for a certain period of time. I reckon there's an age, probably around when you start moving into HP, that 23, 24 age group, where that just doesn't seem to work, and it stays with you for longer and longer throughout a game. So Kristen Neff, she'll talk about the relationship between resilience and self-compassion. So I challenge people to go, what would it be like to be self-compassionate in that particular moment when you made a mistake and you tell yourself it's okay? And it's this real uncomfortable thing for a lot of athletes for a while. And what I'm saying is it's being self-compassionate helps you let go of it faster in that moment, but then later on you can come back to it and be a little bit more critical of it and start to unpack it a little bit more. So yes, but that's what I mean. You have a framework. You might have red head, blue head. You have a process of flushing, whatever it looks like, and that's why while we might have a particular framework, we've got to understand what's the language that particular person wants to use. So for Michaela, flushing the toilet. For other people, spot, stop, shift. For other people, ACT. And there's a whole bunch of them, and you've got to get creative about it, which is the fun part.
Yeah, one of the things that Fozzie said is, the thing that they ask the guys to think about is don't make the mistake. It's next action. Think next action. I wasn't the next or think next task. Where it's here now. It's the present. I can't dwell. I'm in the middle of the battle, so time to reflect is probably not now. Let's see, they're at halftime or it's post game, etc. Is that still kind of language, or what can people be adding to their vocabulary? Is it about self-talk in this sort of moment? Like, where does all that sort of self-talk and things like that fit in?
Yeah, so again, I like the concept of a win-win, which is what's important now, what's important next. So it's kind of what's important now is to calm your system down through like breath work, through like a basic 5 senses mindfulness. You might just use one particular sense, and then kind of what's important next is your next action. I particularly like to connect it back to the person's values, because some of the stuff we're talking about at the moment is around the mental skills, like your visualization, self-talk, breath work. I would say that they're a bit different to the sports psychology, which sits underneath, which connects to your identity and who you are, which the value stuff comes in, which increases motivation. So for me, I want to understand what's really important to this person, what habits are they developing in their life, and this is especially important for pre-HP athletes, where you've still got school going on, you've got other commitments, you might be still living at home. So creating really good values and habits aligned to those values in your everyday life, so that then they become second nature and a pressure moment in the game as well. So that's why I would still connect as much as I possibly can to that person's values and to their identity, because I see it time and time again, it works better in those particular moments of pressure. When you're going, when you don't have a sense of who you are and you're faced with pressure, you're going to be asking, well, who the hell am I in this moment? You want to be able to stand pretty tall and go, this is who I am and this is how I deal with this particular moment. So getting really clear on that is probably like another level that I would say, and that's what probably the best athletes are starting to build on, without kind of giving a false sense of all high performance athletes know exactly who they are, because I'm still trying to work that out. I don't want to give the false sense that you become fully secure and know exactly who you are, but it's a continuation of working on your identity and recognizing that that's still the foundation of some of the stuff that we're talking about.
So let's just dig further into this now. So the identity for many athletes is, I'm a cricket player. I'm a bloody good golfer. I'm not 21-year-old guy from Christchurch. I'm a golfer, or I'm a football player, or I'm the next whatever. Like, how important is having the identity wrapped up in your sport, or equally how damaging can that be? And kind of, do you take that where you want? Like, obviously people will have their own values and their own backgrounds and their own personalities, but that identity piece that you've spoken about, or that image as an athlete, or I'm a coach. I'm not an assistant coach. I'm a head coach, or I'm on this journey. Like, maybe link back to the mental health piece. Like, do you see, or have you seen through your experience, is this a real strength of high performing athletes and coaches that make it, or is it actually in the long run a detrimental aspect to be aware of?
Probably the language that I would use is, I see it as extremely unhelpful, and extremely unhelpful in a high pressure moment. So some people will get away with it, but not many. Like, that's the primary part that I want to work on with athletes and with coaches, around their identity and who they are. And yes, you are a coach, but you're also, you're a husband, or you're a father, or you're a dog owner, or you're a hiker, or you're a whole bunch of different things. You just happen to be someone. You're a human being that coaches. You're a human being that, etc., etc. So because when it comes down to that moment of pressure and your whole identity is wrapped up on whether you're going to win a gold medal, a trophy, that's just too much pressure for the brain to handle at that particular time. So it's the ability to be able to know to step away from that. You can still find your edge, but I still think if your whole identity is wrapped up, the amount of pressure that you experience becomes a really unhelpful level. And that's what will tip people over the edge. And that's where we see probably choking happening the majority of the time. So there's that moment in the pressure, but then it's even after some of those pinnacle events, when people are wrapped up, or their identity is tied up in what they do. We start to see, when you talk about mental health, that's when we start to see real vulnerability in terms of, now what do I do? Like, who am I now? That's why we see such high rates of mental health and mental illness, retirement. I'd say that'd be the same thing as so many pre-HP athletes shifting into high performance, because all I've wanted to be is that professional footballer and get that contract. And they get there and they have these massively high expectations of themselves, and the majority of them will drop out because they can't handle that, because they don't have anything else, grounding them. So I think there's a real vulnerability and real risk, if, especially at pre-HP level, if we're not helping them understand, who they are as much as we possibly can, and what values are really important to them, and then what does that look like as, habits.
So what role can mum and dad, or even the coaches, support the athletes in this, or any support person really? If we say that it's an important piece to be aware of, firstly, and then hopefully try and not put all your eggs in that one basket, so to speak. But what are some practical examples or tips that the support network people can bring to life?
Yeah, I think for parents, it's really trying to reflect on the conversations that you're having with your kids, and just seeing what are you actually reinforcing as rules of success. So, and it's pretty hard, but just kind of like, what sort of attention you're paying them when they win a game, when they win a trophy, or when they perform really well versus when they lose a game, or when they don't perform really well. Do you kind of act within the same, or are you putting conditions on that? Because a young kid will start to interpret that as, conditional love opposed to unconditional love. So just thinking about the questions that, as a parent, that you're wanting to ask afterwards. So I have this real cheesy phrase, which is, milk with a K is strong for your bones, but milk with a C is strong for your mind. And so what that kind of stands for is questions that parents can ask, even from a really young age, which M is memory. What is your best memory from today's game? I, improvement. Where did you improve the most in your game today? What did you notice? L, what did you learn about yourself, your teammates, your skill set, your ability to manage pressure? And C, courage. Where did you show courage in today's game? What did you notice? So just really simple, but just thinking about those questions because they're not necessarily aligned to whether you win or whether you lose, which again helps reduce the chances that their identity is going to be caught up in their sport. So I think there's a lot of self-reflection there for parents around the questions that they ask. In New Zealand, I think we try pretty hard. I don't know what it's like in Australia, but try pretty hard to get kids to try multiple or variety of sports opposed to like early specialization in order to kind of make sure that they're not kind of putting all their eggs in one basket of their identity and that might be, right or wrong, but in terms of building their identity or a widened identity, that's pretty crucial. Yeah. So often that's the way we interact and the questions we ask. Sorry.
No, you're right. I was just saying that certainly 4 or 5 years ago when I was sort of just where we're leaving, balance is better was kind of a catchphrase or a slogan. Yeah. Is that still kicking around?
Yeah, it's definitely still kicking around. Yeah,
so,
sure.
So that would be kind of linking to this, right? So balance of or diversity of movement patterns, diversity of friends groups, diversity of activities, the balance of life, right? And not just only a football. It kind of ties all back into this piece in here. Something I, wholeheartedly believe in as well. Like me as a professional football coach, I need to do other things away from football. Like the last thing I want to do is go and play 5-a-side football with my mates because they love their football and I need to get away from it. I need to create my own space that I will go and, paint the fence because I like home improvement and I'm outdoors and I'm doing something that's still productive and or I'll go to the beach with the guys or go play around in golf. But yeah, last thing I want to do is go do something that looks and feels like my work, my life.
Yeah. Yeah, like in New Zealand, like there'll be wellbeing models like te whare tapa whā, which means kind of the 4 walls of the house. I don't know if you remember that, but it's kind of like the concept of, one of the walls is around like your spiritual, your wairoa, one of the walls is around your support, your whānau, one of your walls is around your physical, your tinana, one of your walls is around your hinginara or your psychological. And so like helping athletes to understand in those 4 different areas, what are the things that help lift you up? So they feel like they've got an all-round identity and sense of well-being. I think for parents to be able to reflect on or far out, like there's exams coming up, like where's that going to put extra pressure on one of those walls, or we're spending a lot of time in football at the moment, like where's the time that he's spending or she's spending with her friends as well, because that's really important. With their grandparents, that's really important. So I think it's a nice way to get a good balance. Probably one of the best conversations that I've tried to have or helps athletes have with their parents is just the reflection piece, but also just asking what's some things that you do for me or we can do for you that's helpful, and what are some things that we do for you that is actually all really unhelpful as well. And so being able to have that open dialogue around with the kid or an athlete that's pre-HP or youth, kind of saying, well, actually these are the things that you do for me that are really super helpful, and these are some of the things that I really don't like. Like you asking me heaps of questions on the car ride home is not helpful for me, but I'm happy to do that like in a day's time. That'd be way better for me, or actually, can you just treat me as your kid? I think the point that I was trying to make is just having the conversation around what is helpful and what is unhelpful, and getting some ideas around that. And that might not happen straight away, but you might just list one or two things and you keep on revisiting it over time. And I think certainly revisiting that at the start of a season as well. So you're not just trying to like ad hoc, trying to make things up as they go along. This is kind of the things that will be helpful and unhelpful. Yeah.
So these are questions and action steps that what parents should be taking, could be taking,
yeah.
Coaches
can do the same thing. I think what's really helpful for coaches in terms of helping with the all-round identity, which I guess is what we're speaking about. I mean, they're there to coach, so they're there to make them better at the sport, right? But nothing stops you from asking a question about how their day was at school, or what are they working on, or finding out what's important to them in their life outside of it, and then asking that follow-up question in a week's time. Like, there's nothing better than, for me as well, like seeing a coach kind of talking to an athlete about stuff outside of their sport, and then in a week's time going, oh, so how's your nan doing now? Because last time you told me that she wasn't so well. Or have you gone to the beach with your dog? Because you were saying that Rover was like, really enjoys going to the beach with you. It's just some of those simple questions as well. Or it might just be being a little bit more empathetic towards the fact that during, exam times or times that they know that there's some stress, is just having a little bit more empathy for them when they're turning up. It might be asking the question if they're not performing so well, rather than saying, going straight to the performance side, asking them how they are first. And if they are not all good, then you approach that and you get them the help that they need or support that they need. If they're saying they're all good, it's like, okay, well, we expect you to still be performing at this level here. So probably just go to the human side of things first rather than straight to the performance.
And that's a really great sort of statement, right? The human piece, where irrespective of what code you are, we are humans. We're going to have bad days, good days, other external factors that build us up and tear us down from time to time. So yeah, getting back to the human level, having conversation, asking questions, listening, creating space to have these away from, the stresses are really helpful. You've mentioned a number of times around that reflection piece, which is kind of the reflection piece. I wanted to ask you around journaling. So value in writing things down versus just, taking 10 minutes peace and quiet and self-reflecting on maybe these questions I ask myself versus writing them down. There's, Michaela Moore was with us in the Mainland Pride football Ferns, and then she's overseas. She would always sit in the front row and bring a notebook to team meetings and write. I don't know what she was writing down. I'm assuming technical information. That was maybe a way that she helped process it, but she would also be journaling in a different book, a journal around her experiences, her emotions, her thoughts. What can you tell us around the act of writing stuff down versus just that self-reflection and thought piece?
Yeah, so James Pennebaker has got some really good research around some of that stuff, if anyone's interested in the research side of it. The difference between doing things inside your head versus writing them down practically is that your brain will still confabulate, it will still make stuff up. Whereas if you write it down, you can see your thoughts for what they really are. And when you see them for what they really are, you can start to challenge them, you can start to change them, you can start to look at them differently and get different perspective. Whereas again, like I said, your brain will start to make stuff up. The brain's negatively wired, so it's typically wired to be able to see the negative stuff or the unhelpful stuff first, and it very rarely wants to prove itself wrong. When you start to write down some of your thoughts or performance inhibiting thoughts that are impacting performance, you can see them exactly for what they are, and you can kind of ask, was that actually true, or where's that false? Which is part of that CBT, cognitive behaviour therapy strategies that we use. So I'm a big advocate for writing things down. Certainly not a big writer myself. I don't say to people, write down, a bunch of, 2 pages worth of stuff. I think short and succinct, but doing it over a long period of time, you're going to get significantly better effects than just simply the internal reflection. Yeah.
Is it something that should be done as part of process, part of habit, part of like your weekly or daily plan, or is it ad hoc? Would it have the same benefits? I've come across in recent times more like sports performance journals that you can buy. That's like a daily thing, a daily reflection piece, asking you the same questions. Is it about the getting it out of my brain onto writing, onto paper? Is it, getting it out of my body? Is it about the daily habitual process of going through this? Where do you see that?
I like the idea of habits, but I would go with, I'm also quite practical in the sense that sometimes it can take up a lot of time. I think it's really important to listen to your mind and your body. So some days you might not feel like it. So I wouldn't necessarily be advocating that people do it every single day, because that might just last for 2 weeks and then it stops. And it's a really good habit to keep for performance and a whole bunch of different reasons. So it depends on the person. Again, I would probably start with, if you can do it twice a week, then that's like amazing. And then we can see if we can ramp it up. And then we can learn from what's actually working from you. Does it work to actually write down your thoughts and your feelings, or do you like to just simply write down what's working well, what's not working well? Do you prefer to have a bit of a to-do list and circling some of the things you can control versus you can't control? Do you prefer just to have 10 minutes of just writing down as much as you possibly can and just seeing what comes up? So there's a whole lot of different ways that you can do it, but I would tailor it depending on the person and just try to get constant feedback. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Spoken about a whole raft of different things. A couple that I've just made notes I want to circle back to. So breath work, something you spoke about earlier on. There's a variety of different methods and ideas behind it. But in a summary, what is the value it provides? What is one or two specific methods that you advocate for or can provide the audience that maybe they can start practicing with?
Yeah. So the easiest one that I really like is just box breathing, 4x4x4. So it's breathing in through the nose for 4 seconds, or for a count to 4, holding for 4 seconds, breathing out through the mouth for 4 seconds, and then waiting again and repeating the cycle. And just imagining that you're going around and visualizing a box at the time. It's probably one of the most common ones. It's the easiest one to remember, and it's easy to practice as well. So I would do that. The key thing for that is being able to breathe from the stomach. And the reason for breathing from the stomach is the diaphragm sits just above that. And when that diaphragm starts moving, it signals to the brain through what we call the parasympathetic nervous system to start actually calming the brain down. Whereas when we're quite panicked and we're anxious, the sympathetic nervous system is acting up and we go into that fight-flight response. So breathing from the stomach and shifting the diaphragm will change that signal back up to the brain, which calms everything down. So that's the main one that I would use. The second one that I have started using more is the physiological side. And so that's comes from Huberman's stuff that I've read and experienced. So I would typically get people using that one when they're in more of a state of panic. And so what that is breathing in through the nose and fully inhaling all through the lungs as much as you possibly can. And then it's another quick, like right at the top of that, and then breathing it out nice and slowly and repeating that a couple of times. So it's a full inhale through the chest as high as you can go, and then it's a quick like that, and then slowly releasing that back out. And so I'll be using that one more as like a quick, short, sharp circuit breaker for when the pressure or stress is coming up a little bit more.
Breathing in is almost to capacity, and then there's still a little bit more with a sharp inhale to really make sure it's.
You could give a much better rundown on it, but there's some small little like empty pockets or sacs, I think he calls them, in the lungs that don't fully get inflated, and doing that. So, look, I'm just a psychologist. I would go and listen to some of his stuff around the physiological side, and you get a much better rundown of that than what I can give you. I think the key to any breathing technique is it's got to be practiced. So don't expect it to work on the field while you're running, whatever it is, if you're not practicing it. So I still think at least 4 to 5 minutes of nice, slow breathing, purposeful, intentional in the morning and at night will make a big difference after about 2 weeks. I think the ability to integrate it and practice it if you're going into the gym, so before you go and lift weights, being able to like calm your system down and then go and start doing like a leg press or whatever you need to do, and going and doing that there. If you happen to do ice baths, there's a great opportunity to be able to use and practice slowing your breathing down as much as you can when you're doing your ice baths. So trying to integrate it with some of your other stuff, even in between like a football drill, going from a rondo over to whatever you're going to do, the ability to be able to just breathe and regulate in that particular moment will set you up significantly better for game day or your event. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, you mentioned Huberman. So for those curious who that is, Andrew Huberman, fantastic podcast called The Huberman Lab, where's a physician, I guess. He can pull back some of the science on some of those things. It's great. Yeah. But the breath work is one that amazes me. Like I remember probably in the last couple of years, I'm starting to see it more and more with sports teams. Yeah. Think back to rugby league. I was watching a Warriors game, and after they either scored the try or they conceded a try, they got in a tight circle, and you can see one person leading the breath work for like 5 seconds. It was either it could be box breathing, but we're starting to see more of it now come to life on our TV through our professional sports teams, bringing these in the moment as opposed to their training space.
Yeah, so it's quite interesting because in the clinical sense, when you're working with someone with anxiety or panic attacks or panic disorder, it's just second nature to be starting to do that. So I remember when I first came into sport and started teaching, it was kind of, people didn't really understand it or get it, or why would we do this? So it's really cool to see it like flourishing a lot more now, and I know people absolutely before me would have been doing it. But the part that I find really interesting is that we're not practicing it at training, or we're just expecting to do it in a game. Well, the other part that came up was that I remember when I was at Sevens and they wanted to do it at half time to be able to like calm their system down, which is great, it's fantastic. But the saying of like a stitch in time saves nine, it's the idea that like still that the arousal is going to increase like throughout a game, and by the time you get to half time you've got to try and drop that significantly. So where are some moments in your game, like a throw in or a goal kick or a line out or a penalty, where you can be doing some breathing ritual or habit in that particular moment to bring it down so it doesn't keep on escalating up. So I think that's probably the key, the practical sense of trying to involve it in a game. It's not just waiting till half time or the end to do it.
Let's talk about halftime, because I was listening to a really interesting podcast last week around a researcher. I'll try and find the episode and drop it in the show notes. But he was researching and he's been employed by different sports, mainly football, but around different European clubs, to go in and basically, clubs are trying to, or coaches are trying to find a performance edge, right? So that 15 minutes from whistle to whistle in football, how are we maximising that time? And in summary, he was saying that for most part, coaches get this horribly wrong. Athletes, unless they're in there, you talk about deregulating, calming. If they're eating and drinking, they're taking on fluid or food, that's a good starting point. But if they're not, they generally disengage with, for the most part, every information that's been rammed down their throat as a generalization. Too much information, too much talking, too much about the coach. What is your view on, let's take football, 15-minute window of time, from a sports psych lens, how we can either, make it less about the coach trying to get information that we think is going to help improve the second half? What are some other elements that you think, or you've seen, or high-performing environments, i.e. the Black Ferns Sevens, what are they doing at halftime that, coaches listening can start to think about maybe how they utilize those precious minutes between?
Yeah, I think there's definitely not one size fits all. I've been across a lot of sports now, and they all present differently, and they're all at different stages. And I think even in the football sense, depending on what's happening in the game and what's happened during the week will change the structure of the halftime team talk. But I'll talk to Sevens first. So one of the main operating goals that we had was that we would have players that are self-reliant, that they wouldn't require necessarily coaches and pressure moments and things like that. And we kind of had this vision, or the coach had this vision, that we'd be able to sit back and watch an Olympic final, semi-final, and the girls would be doing their thing. And I really bought into that, and I really liked it. And one part that we discussed was around the halftime talk, is if the coaches are constantly coming in and talking, giving them instructions, that's not setting up for the vision that the girls had for themselves and what the coaches had for the players as well. So what we did over time was just take some steps back around, well, when would the coach come in, when would they step out? And pretty much now, which is really cool to see, is the coach still doesn't even step in, the girls make those decisions as well. And then even within that, what we found when that first happened was everybody was talking over everyone. So we started to bring in a concept where one person would talk and say, this is what I'm noticing. It might be the attacking leader, and then the defensive leader would also say, well, this is what I'm also noticing. And then the other person, the third person, would simply say, so what I'm hearing from you is these two things, and what I'm hearing from you is these two things here. Right, so this is our plan of action, and they would go. The idea was to make the halftime talk as boring as possible so that the camera wouldn't even have time to come in and listen to the talk. And that the boringness was about just being really super clear with what it was, because they've only got 2 minutes. It's completely different in football, and I'm still learning quite a lot about that. So there are times in football, the main thing is just get really clear with 2 or 3 messages, and that's it. Anything more, and those 2 or 3 messages should be reasonably aligned to what's been happening throughout the week. There shouldn't be a heck of a lot of new information unless it's absolutely critical, because when players are fatigued and tired, it's very hard to take in a lot of information. And I've seen some really good examples of that in football. But again, sometimes the leaders or the team might be chatting about what they're noticing, and coaches might simply say, what are you guys picking up and noticing? What are a couple of things that we need to do or change or keep going on? And they can reverberate straight back, these are the things, and the coaches go, yeah, you're bang on. And here's some video evidence, for example, to kind of like back that up, because not everyone will listen and learn at that time. They like to see a visual. So that's really cool when I see all these different types of ways of learning as well. But that there's a final summary of like just 2 or 3 really key points, because really all players, in my perspective, need. Otherwise, it's too much.
No, that's great, and I encourage coaches listening to think back to their own performances through that 15-minute window, or however long you've got, and what are some of the practices that you are implementing? Are you allowing your players to discuss and share? Are you being clear with 2 or 3 points, or is it a narrative for 15 minutes of talking? Are you using words and pictures? So not everybody has the luxury of a live coding and bringing footage in, but maybe it's using the whiteboard to move magnets around. So those visual learners, as well as those who need to be asked questions. What sort of ratio maybe of time of talking and discussion versus time for players to relax, take on hydration, take on food, and maybe go back to breathing, maybe go back to their mental preparation plan? Like, should we as coaches maybe create space where athletes have their own space to do what they need? Because every individual will be slightly different, whether they want to do their breathing, whether they want to check in on their journal or their mental notes, versus, no, we've got such a short window of time, every second is crucial. Like, team versus individual, coach versus player, like, what sort of, again, everybody's going to be different, right? People need to find what works for them, but through your experiences, what are some of the best practitioners doing?
I think the ability, there's 2 pieces to the ability to emotionally regulate yourself and giving players time to do that, because I think it helps them, essentially comprehend more what's going to be instructed to them or what they're instructing of themselves. Because, if we're emotionally charged, then you're not really going to take on much information, or the information you're trying to provide to other people is just going to be so emotional. It's not going to be necessarily practical and on the point. So there's a good time to be able to give people the time and space to be able to do that. But I also think it's not just about the players, it's about the coaches having the time to regulate their own emotions, to be getting really clear if you've got an assistant coach with you on aligned messaging, and then who is even the best person to deliver that message, because it might not necessarily be the head coach at that point in time. So I think getting really clear on that process for that first 5 minutes, I certainly wouldn't put a timer on it. I think it just depends on the situation. But to be able to go, this is actually our process, so we get emotionally regulated or calm so that we're in the best space possible to take on what information that we need. I think if you're rushing around to spend 12, 15 minutes of getting different instructions and talking to different people, then you probably haven't done your prep work right during your week, because you should still be reflecting on the key things that have been going on throughout the week. That's probably the harsh reality. But I think being able to stop, pause, coaches consult with people that they need to consult with, read the room a little bit, players to be able to regulate themselves a little bit, and then you get really clear on your messaging and how you're going to message that. And I've seen some good examples of doing that. But again, it's pay attention to the energy in the room, your own stuff that's going on, and then make a decision on what that plan looks like. I think, so I was just going to say on your previous point, what I've really liked being part of the NZF coaching license for being a license is we've made sure that some of the coaches are video recording their halftime talks, and then I spend a session with them reviewing those halftime talks with them, but they do a lot of peer-to-peer work opposed to me coming in, and yes, I might provide a little bit of a framework, but I'd probably say every single one of them, even though they feel really awkward video recording their talks, they've found it hugely beneficial. So if I was going to say anything to coaches, is video record a couple of your halftime talks and look at it with a bit of a critical eye around, is what I thought I said in my messaging, was it exactly what I'm seeing in the video, and how would I improve that next time? Video recording would be one of the most amazing techniques to be able to start implementing.
Yeah. I would add another way of building that, it would be having an external person in the room, like a fly on the wall type thing, or a mentor in the room, that's somebody you can trust. But, I was fortunate enough to spend, halftime talk in with Craig Bellamy in the Melbourne Storm a while ago. And I was just literally trying to stay out the way and make sure my phone was off. But, the next day he asked me, what did you see? What did you notice? What, somebody who doesn't know the game of rugby league well enough to kind of give any tactical information. He's like, what did you notice around how us as a staff were working? Were the players engaged? What did you feel around the length of my message? Were you able to comprehend what I was saying, or were you completely lost? Like he wanted me to help him as well. So I think having somebody in that maybe doesn't know your sport is a good thing, and because they don't get caught up in the X's and O's, they're looking at, are the players engaged? How is your energy? How is your tone? How's your time management? All these things, as well as that self-reflection of you watching yourself back. I think are great tools as well. What about post performance? So we're talking about, again, reflection piece, but is it something that you believe should be left 24 hours, like it create 24-hour rule? We don't talk about it, let the emotions die down. Is it better to deal with things like there and then in the moment? Is it different from coach to player as it is to coach? We might have, we're not caught up in the physical exertion of the competition piece. So as a staff, we can reflect in the moment, but maybe the feedback to the team or the individual needs to come later, and then tie in the parent to this piece as well. Like that car ride home, is that a bad time to have a reflection around not necessarily just performance, but, that self-reflection of, are we tracking towards where we're heading longer term, as opposed to what was good or bad about this particular instance?
Yeah. Yes, it's interesting, because, again, different sports will bring up different things. So the reflection in sevens, you've got 2 hours before your next game. So you just got to do it. You got to get it done. So the strategies to be able to come from a reasonably non-emotive place have to be aligned pretty quickly. And even probably the same in international football. Those coaches don't have much turnaround time to be able to do. They've got to get in and they've got to get it done. And you see them doing like 12 a.m., midnight type thing. So I guess it's sports specific as well. I like the idea of doing a bit of a hot wash to begin with. So doing a bit of a reflection, just jotting down a couple of points around. So we're talking about an individual player around their game and their initial thoughts. Enough to be able to get it out of their head to be able to go to bed at night, and just knowing that there's another process or a cold wash where you can do it in 24 hours time with less emotion, and you can reflect back, watch any clips that you need to watch, and kind of say, what was I seeing in the moment when it was fresh in my head versus what does it look like now? Why are there the differences there? So it's not one or the other. I'd probably be doing both, but I'd do a quick little hot wash, and then I'd be doing a deeper dive, and that deeper dive should be connected to what you're trying to work on during the week, opposed to trying to search for everything. That's probably the part that I noticed with a lot of younger players in particular. Or a lot of younger athletes in that pre-HP, is they're trying to get everything perfect and everything right because they want to make that next stage, opposed to kind of going, actually, what was the 2 or 3 things I was really working on during my week or for the last month to get myself better and improve, and looking for those things in their clips or reviewing or reflecting just in their head around those things. Yeah.
Nice thoughts. Is any other kind of parting advice, I guess, let's start with athletes, that maybe we haven't covered off, or you want to emphasise through working with some of New Zealand's best performing athletes in team and individual codes, that, the audience here would be a range of, potentially as young as 15, 16, but, on their journey towards high performance, some hopefully maybe even in that high performance space. So any final words to athletes listening?
I think, again, I'd reiterate getting clear and building, your identity as much as you possibly can. I think getting really good communication and expectations with your parents and your support group, because when you start to shift into that high performance arena, they're the people that you really need on your side, and being really clear on how they're going to support and look after you throughout that time, because you can't do it on your own. It's really helpful to have those strategies set up and expectations set up as much as possible. And I would also say, as you start to shift into that zone, like giving yourself a little bit of time, almost like an internship or something like that. And I know the pressure will be on to perform straight away, but I certainly know those athletes that when they make that shift and they give themselves some time and see it as a bit of an internship, even if it's 3 to 6 months of just getting your feet on the ground, doing the basics right again, that's really helpful. But otherwise, everything else that we've talked about, I think, is things that people can build in, or athletes can build in already.
Yeah, and no doubt when athletes reach a certain stage and level of their chosen sport, people like yourself become more accessible to them. Now, that might not be enforced upon them, but I would certainly encourage, it's not like an ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, right? It's around preventative. It's about, building more tools in that toolbox to become a really complete athlete that can deal with adversity and stuff. But until maybe they can get to that stage, I think the support network around them, coaches included in this, but, mum, dad, brother, sister, mentor, external people, they might need to fulfill some of this role. So anything you want to really, underline for people listening that might fulfill those capacities, that they can ensure that they are, helping, not hindering the athlete's journey.
Yeah, again, I would just reflect on, your relationship over the performance, especially for parents. You're their parents, you're not their coaches, and just keep on trying to foster like a really strong relationship between you and your child, because that allows them a safe space to come back to. Like, high performance is pretty ruthless. It's pretty tough. And the athletes that I know, have got that good relationship with their parents, or it could be like a previous coach, or it could be a pastor, or it could be a teacher or something like that. I think fostering that relationship as much as possible, so you're their safe space to come back and talk to, that would be like probably the number one most helpful thing. And then I guess the other part is be reflective in yourself. If we're expecting some of these athletes to reflect on themselves, like for you as a parent, is just reflect on, how is my behaviour impacting, my child? How is the way that I communicate impacting them? Is this how I want to be? As you can tell, I'm pretty big on self-reflection as much as possible. And you've got to ask yourself the hard questions as well, because often that critic or that compassionate voice inside their head often probably comes from us as parents and as coaches. And so if we can role model reflective practice, if we can role model like ways that we speak to each other, if we can role model resilience, then it's going to come through in them as well. So just be reflective on our own behaviours. Yeah,
brilliant. Hey, Dom, this has been a really enlightening chat. I've taken more notes on this than possibly any other podcast. So really looking forward to helping those people listening with your experiences in this episode, and also the notes we'll put into the show notes. But let's speaking of asking the hard questions, let's move on to close us off with rapid fire questions.
Yeah.
I want you to start us off by you asking me a question to answer.
Okay, the one that I thought of or think of is how would you approach your own playing career, knowing what you know now? Like, how would you approach it differently?
Oh, it was a while ago now. I think a few things spring to mind initially. I think I became a better player when I started coaching through my coach education, because I started to see the game. I saw the game different through more of a coach's lens. My game understanding improved. So where my physical capabilities diminished, I was able to still perform because I was a smarter player. But trying to tie it back to this kind of conversation, the more I've gone down the coaching road and learning different parts of what ultimately performance looks and feels like, and we spoke about a number of things, right? So not even so much recovery, but hot and cold therapy, reflections, journaling, mental skills, putting those into practice, asking questions, all these other little elements I wish I was aware of when I was not even in my prime. Like, as a young athlete, these are things that are accessible now to the younger athlete. And it's just about, in my opinion, it's about accepting that they can help you, and trying them out, testing them out, finding what works and what sticks, and sticking at it. Because I believe those that can implement either mental skills, if you want to describe it that way, or have the balance, can foster strong relationships with the support network. These are pieces of the puzzle that I didn't have, and that might have made the difference between a decent career that I had to what would have been hopefully which was my dream of going and playing professional.
Yeah, so that's cool reflection. Yeah, I often think about that as well. I wish I knew some of the things that I knew now. It would be so cool. And I love the fact that probably a lot more of the younger people in sport today, like asking way more questions, are significantly more trying to find out, like, about psychology. So it's pretty interesting, and it's quite cool that you talked about the coaching license, how that made a difference, because one of the things that we did used to do in sevens is that when players were injured, they'd spend a lot of time in the coach's room and understanding how to coach, and just their perspective coming out of that time was really different. So I quite like that.
Now, that's the whole purpose, I guess, of this podcast, is to try and share the learnings and wisdom of some amazing people like yourself to people listening in, because that conversion from pre-performance to high performance is damn hard. Yeah. So by making language around mental skills, for example, more common, or breath work, or whatever else, different guests provide us, is giving the athletes less of an excuse to say, just from what I just said, I wasn't aware of this when I was 18. Well, hopefully now there's opportunities to be aware of it, and it becomes part of who they are, and that helps that successful transition. Brilliant stuff. Hey, outline a concept or idea from your sports psych world that we can try out in ours.
Yeah, it probably comes from my overall framework of how I think sports psychology works. So I think I've talked about identity as the foundation, and then sitting on top of that is mental skills. And then on top of that would be adversity training. And so I frame that up as understand me, be me. So what are the skills that will help me be the person that I understand myself to be, and then stay me. So how do I stay the person that I want to be in a moment of pressure? And so I think if we think about that concept and we've talked a bit about the understand me and the be me, but what's the stay me part? And it's I think, for coaches, for players, is thinking about how do you put yourself under more pressure, or what I like to say, under more chaos. So could there be like one day a week where there's chaos training, where anything can happen? Because in sport, like, things are unpredictable, and the brain doesn't like things that are unpredictable. So if you can design as a coach a training session that creates unpredictability, things change, the way of the field, the dynamics of it, the rules, an unfair referee coming in and doing things, and thinking about how players are reacting to that moment. Like, I absolutely thrive and love seeing that. So that's what I encourage people to do. Sometimes coaches might not even turn up to a training session. You're catching the high ball, catch the high ball with like goggles on, with basically small little tiny holes that it makes it more difficult. If you're doing a watt bike session, like, how can you only breathe through the nose, for example, opposed to like breathing through the mouth? So just thinking of new creative ways that add a bit more cognitive distraction, uncertainty, to be able to test out some of those skills so that your reflections become better. So I like that little framework. And then I love the tip of the triangle. It's starting to be creative at least once a week with a training session that almost kind of puts aside tactical, and actually goes, we're going to try and bring in a bit of chaos here and have some fun and be curious about how our brains operate. That'd probably be my one idea or concept.
Love that. That's awesome.
Even let the players come up with that training session, because sometimes they're way more creative than what we are as coaches, as psychologists. Like, they come up with give them an opportunity to come up with even 2 or 3 for during the season. They'll come up with some pretty cool stuff.
Cool. Yeah. I'll definitely bring that to life. Give me a recommendation of a book, movie, TV series, podcast that either athletes, coaches, or parents can get about.
Yeah, I really like The Culture Code. I think it's Dan Coyle's book. I really enjoyed that. I'm not much of a reader, to be honest, but the reason I enjoyed it is because there's a lot of practical examples within it, and there's some good psychological basis to it. There's probably quite a few books out there that are like your self-help books and that don't actually have some good evidence behind it. And I really like that, and then the practical element of it. And then can I say one more?
Of course.
Yeah, Unleashing Greatness Through a Pathway of Courage, which is written by a colleague and friend of mine, David Galbraith, here in New Zealand. So I love that book. I love his work. Any opportunity I get to speak to him, like, I absolutely enjoy it. And yeah, so he's written a book, and it's pretty practical, and it's the ability to be able to fill things out and work through your kind of journey as a performer. Yeah,
I was just looking on my shoulder because I've got that book. I thought it was in this room, but I took it to the Rio Olympics. I got it actually my dad had it, so I borrowed it off him, and I got Dave to sign it. He was on the bus for us for a trip to one of the training sessions. He's a good dude, Dave Galbraith. If you haven't come across his work or seen him talk, he talks about the happy fat cow. I was at a conference he spoke about little things like this.
This is bringing back good memories. I love it. Yeah, no, I've got a lot of admiration for him. So, I definitely would. I would plug his book or any kind of speaking event or podcast that he ends up doing. It's great.
Nice. If I gave you a magic wand and you can wave it and change one thing you would like around the sport system or industry, what would it be?
Honestly, I have absolutely no idea. I have no idea. I think if I come up with something, it's not really a magic wand thing, to be honest. But I think the ability to work more with coaches and have a more focus on the psych elements with coaches. I think there's a lot of focus on the players, but I think sometimes the coaches miss out a lot of the time, and so it's not a magic wand thing because we do get this in some environments, but to really help and be involved more in like coaching licenses and education with coaches and specifically work with coaches around certain things in their psychology, that'd be epic. That was probably one of my largest lessons learned from the Paris Olympics was certainly around the pressure and the changes in behaviours that happen with coaches at large pinnacle events. And yeah, I certainly would love for the next 4 years to be more involved in working more with coaches and educating and providing them help there.
Nice one. Well, no doubt coaches listening to this, you've provided them with a wealth of ideas and certainly a starting point to go away and read up a little bit more on. So thanks for that. What's one piece of advice that somebody gave you that you can give us?
I'm not sure who gave this or where I heard this, but I really buy into the quote of success leaves clues. I really like that. I think a lot of the time people come to psychologists when things are not going so well and expecting us to fix it. The reality is the person in front of us fixes it. But I'm probably noticing more now and trying to encourage that players and athletes come and use a psychologist when things are actually going really well, because it does leave clues. It does allow us to help you find your edge a little bit more, because when things aren't going so well, we kind of have the breadcrumbs as to how to put the pieces back together. So yeah, I'd just go with a quote of like success leaves clues. So don't forget to reflect on when things are going really well as well.
Brilliant. Have you got another quote for us, or you want to double down on success leaves clues?
It's okay to care about what people think of you, but it's not helpful to worry about it. And so where that comes from is, I think a lot of people generally fear judgment. And so they'll go quickly to, I care too much about what people think of me, so therefore I've got to not give a shit about what people think. It's natural human nature to care about what people think of you. What's unhelpful is actually worrying about it and spending a lot of time on it for a long period of time, because you ultimately can't change the way that, you can't control what people think of you. So yeah, that'd probably be the other one. Yeah,
nice. I've got one that's similar. So worry is like a rocking chair. You go back and forth and get nowhere. It's an unhelpful emotion. And finally, mate, what is the thing that you are striving for at the moment?
I think what I'm striving for at the moment is there's a lot of complexities around sports psychology and how the discipline looks and how it's used. So I'm probably striving to improve the voice of psychology within sport. And with that comes a lot of distraction, probably a lot of politics, and different bits and pieces. So I'm also striving to have a bit of a quiet mind around some of that as well. I think having a quiet mind would be quite nice. But yeah, I'm certainly trying to do my best to get the discipline of psychology in sport higher and higher and higher, because it's got a lot to offer. And we've got a lot of good sports psychologists out there, both in Australia and in New Zealand. And I think the ability to raise the profile of it and what we can do, and that it's not just a deficit model, would be absolutely ace.
Nice. I wish you all the best for that journey.
Thank you.
It's going in the right direction. Hey, Dom, this has been an enlightening conversation for nearly an hour and a half now. Appreciate your time and your efforts. People listening, whether you're an athlete, parent, a coach, or somebody different, I think there's a lot in there. And I always encourage, whatever lens you are listening from, don't just tune out when we're kind of having, talking about coaches, for example, if I'm an athlete, because there's always things that you could just apply back to your perspective. And having someone like yourself, which is a different perspective again, there's so much information that and time and research in your education, but to be able to distill some of these things down in practical tips is really helpful. So I'm encouraging people listening to go away and listen to it back, make your notes, let that be the starting point, and go and find out more about things rather than just sort of let it wash over you. Because the deficit model is a good one because it's a real performance enhancer, is the way I look at being a happy athlete, being a strong athlete mentally, physically, as well as technically. So it's a real important part of this performance athlete and performance coach and performance environment. So if we want to be coaches that work in this performance space, we need to have a level of awareness of it and acceptance that it's going to help ultimately achieve closer to our objectives. So that was a bit of a ramble. Apologies. Short way of saying, really appreciate your time and efforts, mate. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for sticking through to the end of this episode. It would mean the world to us if you could hit the like or share button so we can get these amazing insights out to other like-minded coaches, athletes, and parents. Cheers.